Europe's Super Sunday elections see a pro-EU candidate defeat a hard-right rival in Romania, a centrist win in the first round of Poland's presidential election, and victory for the incumbent government in Portugal. So, can Brussels breathe a sigh of relief, or is the far right still rising as a political force? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. It was dubbed Super Sunday, 3 elections in EU nations on the same day. But all eyes were on Romania's presidential runoff. It was a crucial vote for the NATO member, and the centrist victory has been welcomed by the European Union and Ukraine. In Poland, the governing party's pro-EU candidate and right-wing nationalist rival are set for a decisive second-round vote in June. But the slim lead by Warsaw's centrist mayor means the country could still lean towards populism. Perhaps the biggest change was in Portugal, where the centre-right alliance won a snap parliamentary election as the far-right gained a record number of votes. Europe's political centre appears to be holding, but for how much longer? And will these results reassure a European Union seeking respite from the turbulence of populist politics? We'll put that to our guests in just a moment, but first our report from Barbara Angopa.
Years of a surge in popular support for far-right parties across Europe gave elections in Portugal, Poland and Romania intense significance. In Portugal, the centre-right Democratic Alliance won its third snap general election in 3 years, but it failed to win a parliamentary majority, with the anti-immigration Chega party securing a record 22% of the vote. The Prime Minister says there won't be any more early elections.
The
Portuguese people have given a vote of confidence to the government currently in office, have given a vote of confidence to the Prime Minister who coordinates the work of this government, and say that the main alignment of the government's actions should be the programme presented for election.
In Poland, centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski topped the first round of presidential elections. He ran on a pledge to abolish a law restricting women's rights on abortion and reforming the judiciary, issues widely seen to have been politicised by the previous government.
I promise you a bill, and I will introduce that bill, which will put an end to what is happening in the Polish judiciary. Finally, there will be order. Polish courts will work faster, and we will have certainty about court rulings.
Trzaskowski's far-right rival, multimillionaire candidate Sławomir Menton, was pushed into third place and didn't advance to the second round. In Romania, Bucharest Mayor Nicolae Dan won a tense presidential election on Sunday. He defeated the frontrunner George Simeon, the leader of the far-right AUR party inspired by US President Donald Trump.
Elections are about community, and today's elections a community of Romanians who want a profound change in Romania. One, a community that wants the proper functioning of the government institutions, a community that wants a reduction of corruption, a community that wants a prosperous economic environment.
Rising house prices, stagnant salaries, immigration and asylum policy are among the issues widely attributed to the rise of the far-right parties in Europe. And these issues haven't gone away. Barbara Angopa for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. Pieter Cleppe is the editor-in-chief at BrusselsReport.eu. He joins us from Brussels. Piotr Buras is the head of the European Council on Foreign Relations Warsaw office. He joins us from the Polish capital. And from Lisbon, we're joined by Antonio Costa Pinto, who's a professor of political science at the University of Lisbon. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Pieter, in Brussels, let's start with you. To what extent was Romania's presidential election the most consequential of the weekend's 3 elections in Europe?
Well, the European Commission was deeply worried about this. They were worried that after Slovakia and Hungary, there would be a sort of a third Eurosceptic leader at the table. But of course, we already have Giorgia Meloni, but she's basically more willing to play along with the Brussels agenda. Now, that didn't happen. Mr. Simeon lost. Despite that, he still convinced, I think, 46% of the electorate, which is considerable and also interesting.
Have Romanians now made their choice between East and West? Is the division in Romania now over?
Well, I think like many of these countries in Central and Eastern Europe, there is indeed a division, which is quite profound. Now, the question is whether the decision to retroactively annul the first round of the presidential election was a wise one. If you look at the reasons why they thought that this election result should not be respected, then I think you can only raise eyebrows. They were accusing the candidate of, having played along with Russia. That's not even entirely clear from his official positions. Also, sort of the report upon which the Romanian courts had been basing themselves to declare the election non-valid was prepared by the security services of Romania, which have a very, very questionable reputation, have been accused of links with the old communist Securitate. So it looks like this decision was rushed, is now regretted. It has clearly helped the other right-wing candidate, Mr. Simeon, to achieve a better than expected result in the new first round of the election. But clearly, in the end, the big turnout in Romania among centrist voters has prevented that he would eventually win.
Okay, let's move to Poland. Piotr, in Warsaw, after this extremely close first round of voting, Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister, has warned that the next 2 weeks will decide the future of the country. How worried should he and his party be?
Oh, I think, Trzaskowski, the mayor of Warsaw and the candidate of Tusk's party, won the first round of the election. But I wouldn't say that he is actually the winner. I mean, he got most of the votes, but his position ahead of the second round of the election, ahead of the runoff of the 1st of June, is actually weaker than the position of his of the candidate of the opposition of the Law and Justice, the Populist Party, Karol Nawrocki. Because what was particularly surprising and some even shocking in yesterday's election was the result of the collective right. I mean, we have a number of right-wing or even far-right candidates and parties, and collectively they got around 54%, while the representatives or candidates of the parties forming Donald Tusk coalition got together 40% of votes. So there is a really quite a significant distance if you measure the strength of both camps. And the big question for Donald Tusk and for Rafał Trzaskowski, his candidate, is how to basically bridge this gap, how to make sure that Trzaskowski receives additional 20 percentage points in the second round, in the runoff, while there are so many right-wing voters.
Okay, Piotr, Trzaskowski won, but only just in this. He had been predicted to win pretty easily. What happened in his campaign? Why did that lead fall away in the days and weeks running up to Sunday's poll?
On the one hand, this result is not surprising because Trzaskowski is representative of a party, of civic platform, Donald Tusk, which is also supported by roughly 32%. So you can say he got just basically the votes of his own party's electorate, while there were many candidates. We had 13 candidates, and also the candidates of the coalition Donald Tusk had their own candidates, so basically the votes were so distributed. But I think that, of course, Trzaskowski could have got a better result, and there are various opinions why he didn't. But I think, and this is an interesting point, I think, in the debate about how to fight populism, how to go about this populist challenge, I think Trzaskowski decided to some extent at least, appeal to the center-right or even right-wing voters by changing his narratives, by using language which to some extent resemble the language of populists, for example, on issues like migration, like climate or some others. And the question is it the right approach? Is a liberal, left liberal candidate like Trzaskowski really credible for the right-wing voters? Okay. Probably not, and that is we learned it last Sunday.
All right,
it didn't work, and he didn't attract enough left or liberal voters.
Okay, let's move to Portugal. Antonio, it was the third snap election in 3 years that the incumbent centre-right Democratic Alliance once again fell well short of a majority, but this time the far-right Chega party took a record 22% of the vote and 58 seats in parliament, the same as the socialists. Their worst result in 40 years? I mean, what can we read into that?
Yes, well, first of all, let's not forget that Portugal was run by a socialist government for 8 years. And this center-right wing cabinet was just for a year in power. These snap elections were caused by a serious ethical, not to say we will see if a corruption problem related with the prime minister, but he succeeded undoubtedly to, first of all, to reinforce a bit is majority. So the Social Democratic Party, the main center-right-wing party, will stay in power for sure for the next 2 or 3 years. But undoubtedly, there was a clear move towards the right and the radical right of Portuguese society and the Portuguese voter. Let me stress just 2 dimensions. First, the young voter nowadays, the uneducated young voter, votes mainly for Chega, the radical right populist party. And the educated young voter votes for the liberal right or even for the right. So the left, the Socialist Party, became, in a way, the party who gets votes mainly from retired Portuguese afraid of the national health system and afraid of the privatization, let us say, of their pensions. So there is a clear move towards the right, and the radical right got votes from all segments of Portuguese society. First from the right, then from the socialist, and in the southern part of the country, even from the old communist voter that was still very much present in Portuguese democracy until 5 or 6 years ago.
And Antonio, how much power will Chega have in this new parliament, given that they've got 58 seats, the same as the socialists? Will this government be any more stable than the last?
Difficult to predict, but one thing is certain. This center-right-wing government will be, in a way, will survive because the Socialist Party, of course, will abstain in parliament. And so I think they will stay in power at least for a year and a half or 2 years. But the main challenge for the center-right is now the radical right. Undoubtedly, they might try even to change the constitution. They have, as a matter of fact, enough power. We will see what happens now. We will have local elections in September. We will see if the Socialist Party will recover a bit from this very, very bad result. But undoubtedly, Chega is the big challenge in Portuguese democracy. There are two elements that I would like to stress in connection with European politics. First, the Portuguese radical right does not play the Eurosceptical card. They know that Portuguese society is very much Europeanist, so they don't play that card. The second element I think it's important to stress in comparison with Central and Eastern Europe is that in terms of NATO, security and defense policy, the Portuguese radical right has a consensus with the center-right and the center-left in terms of the defense policy of the European Union.
Pieter, in Brussels, does the EU leadership there in Brussels get why voters are so frustrated right now across the bloc? Do they understand the appeal of right-wing parties to voters?
Of course, it depends who you mean, but I would argue that within the ranks of the European Commission and in sort of many policy establishments in Europe, people still haven't 100% picked up on a lot of the discontent and the reasons behind this. And of course, the reasons are more fault, but clearly chaotic immigration policies is very important. Look at Portugal, they had a lot more immigration. But of course, in Western Europe, Northern Europe, chaotic immigration is a key driver behind all of this. And you still see, up till today, reluctance to actually do something about this among the policy elites across Europe. Then secondly, the extreme environmental policies that have driven up the cost of energy, that are imposing all kinds of restraints for people. This is a very important source of anger as well. And then last but not least, the concern that the economy is not really going well. People are not really feeling poor, but they feel that we miss some dynamism in Europe, and this is of course, I would argue, linked to the failures to reform the welfare state. So there we have some kind of a conundrum. On the one hand, voters don't want changes to the welfare state. They don't want to see privatization of pensions or of healthcare systems that are requiring ever higher taxes. But on the other hand, they are generally worried about the lack of economic competitiveness in Europe. So I would argue also when it comes to the last thing, also voters should reconsider.
Right. Piotr, of course, each of these three countries, while having EU membership in common, has its own unique issues that are of concern to voters. There in Poland, of course, there were domestic issues specifically they were voting on, including Ukraine. What would a Nawrocki win on June 1st mean for the country and for the EU and for Ukraine? Could Poland become, as former President Alexander Kwasniewski said, another European troublemaker like Hungary or Slovakia?
I think we used to be a European troublemaker for 8 years with the PIS government. And of course, Nawrocki's victory in this election would probably, in medium term or long term, pave the way for the Law and Justice Party, to this right populist party, back to power. We have when you look at the party system and the opinion polls, we have a right-wing majority in the country. So the right-wing PIS, Nawrocki's party, and the far-right party, Konfederacja, they would get the majority of votes if parliamentary election took place today. So there is a real threat that Nawrocki's victory could basically turn the clock of Polish politics and bring us back to the PIS rule. So but in short term, I think this is the main worry of Donald Tusk. This reform project, this liberal reform project, Donald Tusk wanted to implement would be probably prevented by President Nawrocki, because the president in the Polish political system does not hold a very strong power, but he can use veto against each and every piece of legislation. So basically, the president can prevent the legislative agenda of a government, which means that the government basically is unable to introduce any changes, which was the case over the last 1 year and a half. And the big hope of Tusk was that with Trzaskowski's success in the presidential election, this situation would change, that he would have an ally in the presidential office and would be able to implement his political agenda. And lastly, on Europe and on Ukraine, I think, the thing is that, in fact, Ukraine and Europe have become extremely important subject of political polarization in this campaign, and
just very briefly, if you can, please. I wanted to know to what extent the war in Ukraine influenced voters on Sunday.
Not directly, but security is, of course, absolutely the key concern of the Polish people. And there is a lot of confusion about how to make sure that Poland remains a safe country. Is it by aligning with the US despite Trump, and this is Nawrocki's agenda? Is it by investing more into the European defense, and this is more Trzaskowski's agenda? Is it by supporting Ukraine? Or rather, basically concentrating on our own nationally defined, narrowly defined interests. So I think there is a lot of confusion around that, and it is also part of the presidential campaign.
All right. Antonio, you talked about younger, non-university educated people being attracted to and voting for Chega. What for them is the attraction of the party? Why are Portuguese voters in general so fed up with the country's traditional two parties? What's gone wrong in Portugal?
Well, first of all, let me stress that the performance of the Portuguese economy is good, that Portugal has a low unemployment rate. Third, that Portugal is in need of immigration, and immigration is the main issue. In the last 5 years, the cultural or the structure of Portuguese immigration changed completely. From Brazil and Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, the new immigration comes from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. It went up from 7% to 15% in 6 years. Of course, Portuguese entrepreneurs need immigration, and the young vote, especially the non-educated young voter, blames immigration for the low salaries and for the, basically for the main problems of the Portuguese labor market.
Okay, Pieter, in Brussels, many analysts have predicted a surge in the far-right vote on Sunday. What do these results tell us? Did that happen? Is the far right still rising as a political force in Europe, or can Brussels breathe a sigh of relief after Super Sunday?
Look, I think indeed the sentiment of discontent is still very much present across Europe, with, of course, many differences depending on the national situation. After the European Parliament elections in 2024, European governments and the European Commission have sent a signal that they want that they are prepared to change some things. For example, they are currently engaged in an exercise to simplify certain regulations, to postpone certain excessive EU regulations. They're looking at some solutions to stop the migration chaos, but I would argue they're not going far enough to take the wind out of the sails of the populist, as you could call them, simply because they have a number of taboos. Take, for example, immigration, the idea of the Rwanda plan, which was basically providing some kind of a return hub for illegal migrants, something that the British Labour government now supports. This is still a taboo in Europe, despite the fact that in Australia it's been effectively implemented for 20 years, that nobody has died in Australian waters, officially at least. Whereas in Europe, during the last 10 years, we have seen 30,000 people die in the Mediterranean. So Europe has some kind of a misplaced humanitarian superiority complex, while in theory, sort of the chaotic policies are bad for everybody. I think as long as that doesn't change, we will continue to see these protest movements.
Of course, we don't know what's going to happen yet in the second round of voting in Poland. So, Antonio, let me come to you for our next question. Given the mess that this election has resulted in, could Chega, do you think, win the next? Is it still on the rise?
Well, Portugal is under a sequence of 3 elections. Parliamentary elections, local election in September, and presidential elections in 2026. Portugal is a semi-presidential democracy. So the basic question for the presidential elections, let's not forget, is the following. We have an admiral, a sort of an anti-party candidate that might win the next presidential elections. So clearly, the 2 main political parties in Portugal are in trouble, not just in terms of parliamentary elections, but also in terms of the next presidential elections. We will see what happens, but Portugal might change.
And finally, Piotr, in Warsaw, it's impossible to predict, I know, but what do you think is going to happen on June 1st?
It will be a very narrow result and a neck-and-neck race between Trzaskowski and Nawrocki. And I think the big question for the Liberals in Poland is whether it will be possible for Trzaskowski, for the Liberal candidate, in the remaining 2 weeks of the campaign to reach the level of mobilization of the Liberal electorate, which we witnessed in October 2023 when Tusk won the election and came back to power. I think this is the main goal of the campaign of Trzaskowski in the remaining 2 weeks, but it's an open question whether it's going to be successful.
Okay, gentlemen, there we're going to have to end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Pieter Cleppe, Piotr Buras, and Antonio Costa Pinto. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to Facebook. Our page there is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there, at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha, we'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.